Hello, I think we can start, Deniz Hocam. Our
Mhm,
next speaker is Dr. Deniz Günceler. He is Principal Research Manager at Microsoft Research AI for Science. He has and he has been in this position for over 2.5 years. Prior to that, he was working full time at as applied science manager at Amazon. He has a PhD degree on high performance and parallel computing, energy materials design, electronic structure theory, and density functional theory. And he has a bachelor's from Bilkent University in physics. Deniz Hocam, you can go ahead with the presentation.
mhm. Uh, Thanks a lot, and thanks a lot for the invitation. So I'll be talking today about some of the work that happens in our organization, AI for Science, in Microsoft Research. I'm happy to take questions during the talk itself. It's only that I probably won't be able to monitor the chat while I'm speaking. So if there are any questions in the chat, if someone could speak up and bring them to my attention, that would be really good. I also prepared more slides than I probably have time to present. So depending on how many questions I get and how the conversation is going, I don't expect to reach the end of my slide deck, which is okay. So I have a few backup slides in case we have extra time, but if not, and if you have any interesting conversation going on, that's also very good. Today, I'll be talking about a transformation that's been happening in physical sciences, especially in physics, chemistry, biology, and molecular biology through the application of state-of-the-art machine learning and artificial intelligence in these physical sciences. I'll be talking a little bit about the work that happens in our team and work we have recently published and open sourced. But I'll also be talking about and sharing my thoughts on where the field has been going in the last few years and where I think it will continue to go in the years to come. So I would like first to start giving a very top-level bird's-eye overview of the work that happens in Microsoft Research for Science, especially in our organization. And I thought the easiest way of doing that would be to give you a list of the recently published and open sourced packages and papers from our organization. AI for Science is a relatively young and new organization at Microsoft Research. We are approximately 2.5 years old at this point, and it was founded, motivated by the recent successes with the large language models, and with the hope that application of state-of-the-art machine learning would also similarly transform physical, chemical, and biological sciences the same way that large language models have transformed machine-based natural language understanding. So in those approximately 2.5 to 3 years, a number of publications and open source models have come out from our lab. And then I'll walk through some examples here just to give you an idea about the kind of work that happens in our lab before jumping into talking in detail about one of the latest publications. So one of the most famous models that came out of our lab is Aurora, a foundation model for the atmosphere. This was open sourced last year, and has been picked up by a number of meteorological institutes around the world for predicting weather patterns. Similarly, open source last year was AI2BMD, which is an AI-powered or accelerated biomolecular dynamics simulation code with the hope of using AI to accelerate molecular dynamics simulations of biomolecules, for example, protein and drug interactions. Another model also from last year that came out from our lab is TAMGen. So TAMGen stands for Target Aware Molecule Generation for Drug Design using a chemical language model. So this is a generative model that aims to generate candidate molecules for biomolecular targets. We are also active in the materials space as well, and these are reflected in these two, again, very recently open source models, MatterSim and MatterGen, for predicting materials properties and also for generating candidate materials with specific target properties. And finally, just open sourced a few months ago is BioImmune1, an emulator for protein dynamics. And today I will be talking about another model called Scala, which was published, or the paper was put on our archive around June, but the model itself was just open sourced about 2 weeks ago. And this is about using machine learning to learn an exchange correlation function for density functional theory, which is one of the important simulation methods for modeling both organic and inorganic materials. So one thing I want to also touch upon before jumping into details about the Scala model is the difference between emulators and generative models, and how these the different kinds of models are transforming physical sciences. So when we talk about using machine learning or using AI in physical sciences, we typically talk about two very different classes of models. The first class is what we call an AI emulator. These AI emulators are basically accelerators for the laws of physics. So, for example, if you're working in biomolecular space, one of the ways you can run simulations in this space is through the use of molecular dynamics, for example, which uses Newton's laws of motion to simulate how atoms and molecules and biomolecules would interact. And an AI emulator of this would be an AI model that learns from these simulations and then can approximate these simulations orders of magnitude faster. So an AI emulator, in a nutshell, is a machine learning model or an AI model trained on physical data or on physical simulations that can approximate those simulations much faster than those simulations can run. A second class of models are what we call generative AI models, and the language models of today's world fall into this category. And these are models that predict new things. So for example, if you're a pharma company trying to come up with a new drug, or if you're a materials company trying to come up with a new material for machine you're building, you might want to generate some candidate materials to test out in the lab. And the generative models are the kind of models that can give you such candidate materials or candidate drugs. The goal of a generative model is that you describe what you want, and then the model generates, and this is where the name comes from, and the model then generates candidate molecules or candidate materials that might have the properties you're interested in. So in a way, these emulators and these generative models, they do the opposite thing. An emulator basically is a model where you can ask, I have something, what are its properties? And a generator is a model where you can ask, these are the properties I'm interested in. Can you generate some example materials for me? So in a way, these are the inverses of each other. In one scenario, you know what you have and you want to calculate its properties fast. And in the other case, you know what the end result you want, or you know what the property you want, and then the model helps you generate some candidates for that category. The model I'm going to talk about today, Scala, it belongs to the first kind. Scala is an example of an AI emulator. It's a model that emulates the laws of physics, but of course does it in a way that's much faster, much more scalable, and much more computational friendly, which then allows us to accelerate the design of new drugs or accelerate the design of new materials. I'm not going to talk about this for today, but I would also highly recommend that everyone here check out TAMGen. TAMGen stands for Target Aware Molecule Generation. It's a generative model that came out of our lab last year and has been open sourced. The code and the model are available on GitHub in case you want to download and try it out. And the goal of this model is to generate molecules that can target specific markers, like, for example, a specific protein. As I said, I'm not going to talk about this today, but given the topic of this workshop, I highly recommend this model to everyone here. With that said, let's jump into the topic of today. And before I do that, I'm going to take everyone back almost 100 years back in history and talk a little bit about the history of quantum mechanics and how this ties into today's applications in the drug design space and also in the material space. This is an almost 100-year-old quote by Paul Dirac, who was one of the founders of the fields of quantum physics or quantum mechanics. And he had some ambitious and interesting things to say about 100 years ago. So what Dirac said was that the general theory of quantum mechanics is now almost complete. The underlying physical laws necessary for the mathematical theory of a large part of physics and the whole of chemistry are thus completely known. And the difficulty is only that the exact application of these equations leads to equations much too complicated to be solvable. It therefore becomes desirable that approximate practical methods of applying quantum mechanics should be developed, which can lead to an explanation of the main features of complex atomic systems without too much computation. It's a fairly long quote, but in a nutshell, what Dirac was saying is that we know the laws of physics, but these laws are mathematically very complicated, and solving these equations exactly is often not possible. So we need approximate theories or approximate ways of solving these equations so that we can apply the fundamental laws of physics to describe atomic or molecular phenomena. And what Dirac was referring to is the Schrödinger equation, also again, almost 100 years old, discovered about 3 years before this famous quote by Dirac. The equation looks like this as it's shown on the slide. It's an equation that's very simple to write down. It's just a handful of symbols and incredibly difficult to solve. The many-body Schrödinger equation is only solvable for the hydrogen atom. It's barely solvable for a number of simple high symmetry systems. Approximately solvable things like for systems like the helium atom, but anything more complex, exact solutions are almost impossible to come by. But what's very important is that all of chemistry and almost all of molecular biology follows from this equation. If you had a magic box that could solve this equation exactly for anything you put in, that box would be able to predict all of chemistry with exact accuracy. And likewise, all of molecular biology as well. As I said, all of chemistry and molecular biology follows from simple-looking equation. But as I said, the exact solution of this equation is close to impossible, except for very simple or very high symmetry systems. And if we could solve this equation quickly and cheaply, and these quickly and cheaply is extremely important here. This would open up the discovery of many new drugs, many new materials, and this could also help us understand many mechanisms in life sciences. As I said, we would be able to exactly model what atoms and molecules do on the computer. But as I said, this equation, while it's very easy to write down, is close to impossible to solve, except for a number of very small or very high symmetry systems. Now, the reason this equation is very difficult to solve is that because it scales exponentially with the number of electrons that you solve for. So the degree of freedom in this equation is the electronic configuration, which is also called the electronic many-body wave function. And if you have twice the number of electrons in your chemical reaction, the complexity of what you have to do scales by the exponential of that. And exponential scaling, anytime a computer is involved, becomes very quickly prohibitively expensive. So for n electrons, you need e to the n number of variables, approximately, which means that we can solve this equation, Schrödinger's equation, for small systems, but we cannot solve it for very large systems. Like, for example, solving the Schrödinger's equation for a large protein in water solution inside a cell is out of the question with exact theoretical methods. Now, this is where something called density functional theory comes in. Density functional theory is nothing new. The theory behind it goes back all the way to the 1960s, so it's older than I am. It's been one of the primary workhorses for atomic and molecular simulation since the mid-90s or so, when computers became fast enough that we could actually do density functional theory on the computer. What the density functional theory does is that, speaking mathematically, density functional theory converts a linear eigenvalue problem in exponential number of variables to a nonlinear eigenvalue problem in a polynomial number of variables. But more colloquially, what it does is it integrates out this many-body wave function, leaving only the average density of electrons. And then you construct quantum mechanics not on the many-body wave function, but you construct it on the average density of electrons. And the magic of this is that this scales linearly in memory with the number of electrons that you have, and depending on the approximation that you use, this scales either cubically or with the power of 4 in the number of electrons you have. Now, if there are any computer scientists in this room, they're going to say that cubic or quartic scaling is still very bad, but it's much better than the exponential scaling that quantum theory in general has. So what density functional theory essentially does is to make this problem solvable on modern computers. As I said, the theory behind density functional theory dates back to the 1960s. Around 1990s or so, the invention of modern computers made this problem solvable on the computers. And since then, density functional theory has become probably, together with molecular dynamics, one of the main workhorses for anyone working with atoms or molecules or crystals. Now, just to illustrate the importance of this, I'm just going through an example. The example is the water molecule. The water molecule is one of the most important molecules in the world today. It's the fundamental basis of life. And it's also a very simple system. It's got 3 atoms. These 3 atoms together have only 8 valence electrons. Not that many electrons. 8 is not that large a number. Let's assume that we use a real space discretization of 100 cubed, so 100 grid points on each x, y, and z dimension to represent the many-body wave function. If you actually do the math, 100 cubed to the power of 8, because we have 8 valence electrons, it comes out to a very, very large number. So this is approximately 10 to the 48 double precision numbers that you have to keep in the memory of your computer. That's approximately almost 10 to the 37 terabytes of data just for one water molecule. Now, just to give you a sense of how insane a number this is, the size of the internet in this year is approximately estimated to be around 10 to the 11 terabytes. And just for fun, what I did is I went to the Microsoft Azure price portal. I calculated how much it would take to store this amount of data on the cloud, and I actually put in the exact number of zeros into the slide. That's how many dollars you would need per month to store this data on the cloud in Microsoft Azure. Of course, this is a joke. This is not real. There is no data center in the world that can store that much data. There's no computer in the world that can process that much data. The many-body wave function of just one water molecule is impossible to put on the computer with today's technology. And the numbers on the slide, they look like crazy because they are. I mean, I calculated these numbers not because this is actually doable, but just to illustrate how comically impossible this task is. By contrast, if you use these density functional methods that scale linearly in their memory requirements, you get something in the order of 8 times 100 to the power 3, which is less than 100 megabytes. 100 megabytes these days is nothing. Like my phone can process that data relatively easily. So essentially what the density functional theory does is that it takes a problem that required insane amounts of memory to solve on the computer, and then basically reduces the memory requirements to something that's manageable and solvable by modern computers. So, if DFT is so amazing, then what's the problem? Why is Microsoft Research working on density functional theory? Why am I giving this talk? Why haven't we already solved all the problems in chemistry and biology? And yeah, so what's the catch here? And the catch here is that the accuracy of density functional theory is often not enough for many applications. As I said, the theory behind density functional theory is in principle exact, meaning that this should be doable. But it's an existence proof, the kind that mathematicians often have a lot. We know there exists a functional that can exactly represent the many-body wave function. We just don't know what it is. And the approximations that have been developed until today, while they're incredibly powerful, they're nowhere near at the level, they're nowhere near as accurate as we would need them to be to unlock this enormous potential in things like drug discovery or materials design. And that now becomes a core issue. How can we make density functional theory as accurate as solving for the many-body wave function? Now, what's more is that density functional theory has an unfortunate and nasty habit of failing, especially when things get interesting. It fails when the physics get interesting. It fails when chemistry gets interesting. It fails, for example, for correlated systems. It fails for localized electrons. It fails when, for example, there are highly localized magnetic systems. Whenever things get fun, density functional theory has a high error. And it has problems predicting things like Wigner crystals or superconductivity. As I said, when things get interesting, density functional theory has a habit of being in a low accuracy regime. Now, the attempts to improve density functional theory accuracy, for example, by introducing things like Hartree-Fock exchange, which is one of the more popular approximations in the last 10 to 20 years, they typically increase the computational cost of density functional theory. The cost of density functional theory scales cubically with the number of electrons. So if you double the number of electrons in your system, or if you double your system size, the problem that you have to solve gets 8 times more complicated. With these more accurate versions of DFT, typically the complexity doesn't increase by 8 times, it increases by 16 times, because these more accurate methods, they often bump the computational complexity from cubic to the power of 4. And this is not something we want. As I was saying earlier, the real power of this level of atomic and molecular simulation can only be unlocked if we can solve these equations quickly, and we can solve them with cheap computers. And those are the two primary motivations we have going into this work: to make density functional theorem more accurate, but without increasing the computational complexity. And this is where our work Scala comes in. As I was saying earlier, we published this work in June. Put it on our archive. The journal submission is currently ongoing. The archive link is listed below. The code and the models were open sourced almost 2 weeks ago now. The GitHub link is also in the slide. Feel free to go there and download the model. The model is fast enough that it should be able to run on a modern laptop or even on your phone if you are so inclined. And this work involved the collaboration of many teams in Microsoft Research, including mine, everything from machine learning and AI expertise to quantum chemistry expertise, all the way to just doing large-scale distributed compute. And at its core, this new Scala functional is 2 things. There are 2 key ingredients to Scala. The first one is a new non-local interaction architecture that we've developed for capturing the exchange and correlation between electrons. And the second one is a very large, the largest of its kind, the data set that our team has generated for training Scala. The first rule of machine learning, or the first rule of AI, is that your model is only as good as your data. You can't have a good model on bad data. If you want to have a good, strong, powerful AI model, you need a rich and diverse and large data set. This is the first rule of any AI model. And because of this, we have spent a lot of time and energy of our team generating this large data set. This data set is generated by using very expensive quantum chemistry techniques like quantum Monte Carlo or coupled cluster theory to generate a lot of training data, which we can then use to train a density functional theory exchange correlation functional. The size of the data set is approximately 140,000 training labels, which is more than an order of magnitude larger than the largest data set on this topic that came before it. And both Scala and this data set, which we now call the MSR ACC, MSR for Microsoft Research, Accurate Chemistry Collection for ACC. They're both open source, and you can go ahead and try them out if you are so interested. And just to give you an overview of what's in this large data set that we've generated, it's a combination of different kinds of chemical reactions that we have generated. The largest part is something called atomization energies. So these are basically the energy that would be needed to break a molecule into its constituent atoms. So this is the energy of breaking a water molecule into an oxygen atom and 2 hydrogen atoms. This forms approximately half of the data that we've generated. Then we also have a fairly large data set of conformers. These are slightly slight variations on the geometry of on a molecule, which then changes its energy. We also have close to 10,000 proton affinities and ionization potentials, and also a small number of chemical reactions. So these are basically reaction paths. And this large data set serves as the foundation of the AI model that we've trained. As I said, the first rule of any AI model is your model is only as good as your data. If you need a good model, then you need a good data set. The functional itself has a relatively simple functional form. So this is shown over here. This is actually a variation on the exact exchange of the uniform electron gas, except that we've added an enhancement factor, which then helps us to enhance the electronic exchange and correlation based on what the neural network predicts. I'm not going to spend too much time talking about the mathematics of this. I think that's better done offline. If anyone's interested, if anyone in this call is interested in the mathematics of density functional theory, I recommend that you check out our paper. There's a very large appendix describing the mathematics behind this new exchange correlation functional. But the important thing is that this is built on top of the exact LDA approximation for electronic exchange. And when this enhancement factor goes to 1, it reduces into that. The model itself is actually a fairly small model, especially in today's world of large language models. You're going to notice that our model size is still fairly modest and not that large. The model itself has just shy of 300,000 parameters, of which most of them are for describing the local electronic interactions, and a small number is used for describing the long-range non-local interactions. And for the non-local part, an all-to-all interaction or communication between all points on the electronic grid was, of course, prohibitively expensive. So what we opted to do is to coarsen the electronic grid for the long-range interaction to reduce the computational complexity and to make sure that the model runs fast. You can compare this coarsening to how, for example, a JPEG compression for an image works. When you have an image and you save it on a disk, you don't save the value of every pixel into disk, because that would require just way too much storage. Instead, what it does is that modern image encodings, they compress the image into something that's much smaller than saving the value of every pixel. Video encoders do the same thing. You don't save an image for every scene in your movie, for example. Instead, you also compress these temporally as well. We apply the idea of this coarsening is not too different from this. Essentially, we're compressing the electronic grid into lower dimensional representation so that the long-range interaction can be done more efficiently. Of course, there is some loss of accuracy coming from this approximation, but as you're going to see next, this is kept within a manageable level. The architecture looks like this. It actually looks fairly complex, but I assure you it is not. It consists of primarily a number of MLP layers that process the electronic density and density associated features, and then passes it to the local and non-local interaction models, concatenates them again, and then passes the final result to another MLP, and then we integrate over the space to calculate the full electronic exchange and correlation energy. The training protocol itself is fairly straightforward, as it is with most modern AI models these days. We train in 2 stages. The first stage is pre-training, where we train with this very large number of quantum chemistry energies that we've generated, and then we minimize the loss that is shown on the screen. In order to accelerate the pre-training stage and to train faster, basically, we minimize the reaction energies on the B3 lip densities. This is just an approximation to accelerate the first phase of training. In the second phase of training, you add a self-consistent step where you regenerate the electron densities with Scala before evaluating the loss. Of course, this makes the training much smaller, much slower than the pre-training phase, but this increases our accuracy by quite a bit. You can compare this training regime to something similar to what modern language models are doing. Most modern language models will have a pre-training phase where it's trained on raw text, and then they would have a second fine-tuning phase either through some kind of high-quality instruct data sets, but increasingly these days more and more using reinforcement learning with human feedback, such as something like a direct preference optimization, or DPO. Our training regime in spirit is inspired by that. In the first phase, we train on a lot of low accuracy data, and then we fine tune on a much smaller amount of very high accuracy data. Again, this is done mostly because of computational considerations to make the training faster and less expensive. Now, with that very long introduction, I would like to now show some results and why I think all this work is very exciting and is opening a new door into transforming molecular simulations, especially simulations of chemistry and biochemical systems. This is a two-dimensional graph showing the accuracy of various approximations of density functional theory. The x-axis is the GMTK-N55 benchmark dataset. The y-axis is the W417 benchmark dataset, which comes from our lab. Both of these benchmarks are high accuracy quantum chemistry calculations that are used to evaluate the quality of density functional approximations. The different dots on this plot correspond to the different approximations. I would like to draw your attention to the different colors and different shapes. The colors show the different classes of approximations. So everything from hybrids to non-local meta-GGAs to meta-GGAs to GGAs. The shapes are the more important stuff. These show the computational complexity. So these show the difference between slow functionals and fast functionals. Circles represent the fast functionals. These are typically low, historically they're lower accuracy, but they're faster. These scale cubically with the number of electrons or your system size. The triangles correspond to the slower functions. These are much more accurate, as you can also see from the graph, but these scale cubically with the system size. Models on the lower left-hand side of this plot are good. Models on the upper right-hand side of this plot are low accuracy and high error. So error goes down on the diagonal as you go from upper right-hand side to lower left-hand side. As you can see, in general, the triangles do better than circles. No surprises there. Basically, what the triangles are doing, these more expensive functionals are doing, is that they're trading a computational cost for more accuracy. And what Scala does is that by using AI, we are essentially breaking this trade-off. The Scala functional is as accurate or even more accurate than the triangles, but at the computational complexity and cost of the circles. So essentially, it combines the best of both worlds. It's a function that's both fast and at the same time as accurate as the slow functionals. And this is why we're so excited about Scala. It's essentially breaking this trade-off in the scientific community. Until now, the density functional approximations were either high accuracy or they were fast. Now, through the application of modern machine learning and artificial intelligence, we can get a functional that is both as fast as the fast functionals and as accurate or even more accurate than the slow functionals. And this is why we think this will open up new applications in material science and drug discovery, because we will be able to get the accuracy of the slow models at the computational cost of the fast models. Now, this is just another example of the runtime scaling. The x-axis of this plot shows the number of orbitals in the calculation. The y-axis of the plot shows the number of the total runtime per step. The red is our Scala functional, and we're comparing against two other functionals that are fairly popular these days, R2scan and MO62X. And our R2scan is the cheap functional, one of those circles. MO62X is one of the expensive but more accurate functionals that's shown in yellow, in blue over here. As you see, Scala is actually faster or has better scaling than the fast functional, but it's more accurate than the slow functional over here. So it's through the application of artificial intelligence, we can combine the best of two worlds, as fast as the fastest functionals out there, but at the same time, the accuracy of the most accurate functionals over there. And just as a reference, these runs were done on a single A100 GPU. Now, one more thing I want to talk about is the importance of non-local, this non-local term in Scala, because that's where the magic happens. So what we're showing over here in red and blue is the same plot from before, but basically we've trained two versions of Scala. The first version in red is basically the architecture we've released and open sourced. The version in blue, which is much worse, is a Scala with its non-local parts removed. So it's only a local electronic interaction. And as you see, the red models are doing much better than the blue models. And for each kind of architecture, we've trained the model 3 times from scratch, just to show you that these results are not a coincidence, that these are not statistical noise, but this is actually this difference between the non-local Scala model we released and its local cousin are statistically significant. So even though this non-local interaction is small and it only has a very small number of parameters in it, it's crucially important to make the accuracy that we're interested in possible. We also looked at how this model scales with more data and more diverse data. I'm not going to spend too much time into this figure, but the fundamental idea is very simple. We've trained the Scala architecture with 4 different combinations of data sets. So if you look at our data set, we've broken our data set into 3 parts called A, B, and C. And then we've basically done the different combinations of these sub-data sets to see where we get the most accuracy. No surprise here, we get the most accuracy by pulling all our data together. That's the reddish pink models on the lower left-hand side. And any version or cousin of Scala that was trained on less data does significantly worse. The blue one, in fact, does so much worse that we actually had to break this graph, put in a break on the y-axis and jump from 2 to 15, because that model was just those models were just way worse. But again, no surprises here. Again, your model is only as good as your data set. You need a very large, diverse, and strong data set to have a strong model. And this is what this graph is illustrating. What this is also saying is that if you add even more data, we could probably get an even more accurate model. The last one, and again, for time reasons, I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but essentially one of the interesting things we saw when we worked on developing Scala was that the laws of physics emerged from the data. And as a physicist, as someone with a theoretical physics background, this was just very beautiful to see. So even though we don't know how this exact density functional should behave, we know how it should behave under certain scenarios. And one of the things it needs to do is to satisfy this inequality at the bottom of the slide here. We know that at any point in space, this equality cannot be violated. This is a law of physics. This is one of the fundamental laws of quantum mechanics. And we did not train the model to obey this inequality. Instead, we just added more data to our training set. And as we added more training set, we saw that this inequality went from being violated all over to kind of not violated. And at our largest data set, it was actually obeyed everywhere in space. And this was just another confirmation that the model was actually learning the correct physics, that even without being trained on this inequality, it was learning this just from more and more data. And as I said, as someone with a theoretical physics background, this was just very, very beautiful to see. So now I want to talk a little bit in the last 5 to 10 minutes in more abstract terms. So I've shown what this exchange correlation functional is and what it can do. And now I want to talk a little bit about why this gets me very excited and why I think Scala and other models like Scala, we're not the only ones working in this space. They're opening the door to many new application areas in physics, in chemistry, in material science, and most importantly, my favorite area in biomolecular sciences. So essentially, the fundamental thing to take away from Scala is not the model itself. It's the fact that modern machine learning, modern AI, can break this trade-off between cost and accuracy. Historically, so if you ask the quantum chemist or a quantum physicist, what they would say is that, if you want to get more accuracy, you need to pay more. And by pay more, meaning that you need a faster, better CPU or GPU, more memory. So basically, if you want more accuracy, you need to pay for it. But what Scala has been able to achieve is essentially to break this trade-off by using AI to emulate the laws of physics and is essentially give us a model that's as accurate as the most accurate, or even more accurate than the most accurate models out there, at the cost of much cheaper models. And here, data is key. And I think this is the third or the fourth time I'm saying this, but this is incredibly important, so I think it's worth repeating. An AI model is only as good as its data. No data, no model. Good data, good model. And this is something you can actually quantify and measure with scaling curves. And this is also something that we've experienced and saw while training Scala as well. And this is also providing a clear path to improving Scala and models like Scala. We've seen that accuracy goes up with more data, which means that if we generate more data, if we put more energy and time into creating even larger data sets, then the accuracy should keep improving. And finally, we're looking for community feedback. We're essentially looking for feedback from people like you to go on GitHub to download the model, download the code, to try it out, see where it works. We are especially interested in scenarios where it doesn't work so that we can go and fix those cases, usually by generating more data to represent those examples. And yeah, the open source the model because we're interested in feedback from the scientific community, from physicists, from chemists, from molecular biologists who are interested in simulating atoms and molecules in action. And finally, in the last few minutes, I want to talk a little bit about why we're just at the cusp of a huge transformation in natural sciences. And this I'm going to show by comparing the model of this Scala model to other language models out there. So as I said, this Scala is an example of the application of modern machine learning, modern AI into natural sciences. And we've done this by training a model that has approximately 300K parameters. If you look outside and see what modern open source or closed source models, for that matter, look like, you're going to see numbers similar to those in this slide. So these numbers I pulled by going to the Llama CPP website and also to the Hugging Face website, and then just sorting by popularity. I prepared this slide approximately 2 months ago, and at the time, these were the most popular open source models out there. So I'm not going to walk through every single model in this list, but the important thing is these models are in billions of parameters. They have billions of parameters, whereas the model we just saw, open source Scala, has less than 1 million. It has less than 1/3 of a million of parameters. Even with such a small model as Scala, we've been able to break this trade-off between accuracy and computational efficiency. Imagine what we can do. Imagine what can be accomplished once these scientific models, these physics models, chemistry models, they grow to the same size as some of these language models out there. Imagine what, for example, can be done with molecular dynamics or with density functional theory if we have a model that's as large as, for example, DeepSeek or Qwen or Kimi or Hunyuan or Cog or so on, or Flux and so on and so forth. So this is why I believe we're at the edge of a transformation. That in natural sciences have just begun to scratch the surface of what's possible with machine learning and AI. Model sizes are relatively modest and small compared to other areas, like, for example, language modeling. But as we scale up our data sets and as we scale up our model sizes, we should see an enormous transformation in how we discover new drugs, in how we discover new materials, and how we understand chemical reactions and reactions that underpin important biological processes. With that said, I want to show just one more comparison. In the previous slide, I compared the sizes of the models. Now I'm comparing the sizes of the data sets. So Scala was trained on approximately 140K quantum chemistry labels, which is the largest data set of its kind right now. But take a moment to compare this to two of the popular open source data sets. The first one, Common Crawl, is used for language modeling, and the second one, Lion 5B, is used for image models. The Common Crawl is growing at a rate of approximately 400 petabytes a month. This is an incredible growth rate, and it contains approximately 10 petabytes of data. Lion 5B contains almost 6 billion image-to-text pairs. Again, much larger just in terms of the raw data set size compared to what we have for things like chemistry and biology. And this is why, again, I'm so excited. The data, it's not just the models are small, the data sets are also small. And as we scale up these data sets, I am confident that this will trigger a massive transformation in how we do science, how we do physics, how we do chemistry, how we do biology, and most importantly, how we discover new drugs and materials. With that said, I think I'm 4 or 5 minutes early, but I would like to end my monologue and then open the forum for any questions.
Dr. Deniz, thank you for this very interesting and informative talk. I wonder whether there are any questions from the audience.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, we can hear.
Yes. Thank you very much for your presentation and this wonderful and innovative work, first of all. It was such a pleasure to listen to your presentation. Can you come back to the training? It
Is
was
it-
it's the training protocol. So B3LYP is a hybrid method, but its parameters are fit on experimental data.
Yes.
And in comparison to BLYP, it's not considered like a quantum mechanical method by physicists. So consider your work as a improvement of quantum mechanical DFT exchange correlation function.
So the reason we use B3LYP is just for accelerating the training. So what we want to do, in fact, is we want to use the self-consistent density of Scala. And that's what we do in the second phase of training. But this ends up being very expensive. And the reason this is expensive is at every step, we need to run a full SCF loop to generate the self-consistent Scala density. This ends up being very expensive. And then using B3LYP was just basically accelerating the first phase of the training. So we're not actually using B3LYP densities once Scala is trained. We're only using it in the first phase of the training just to get something that's approximately okay. And once the functional is approximately okay, we switch to using self-consistent densities generated by Scala during training as well. As I said, this is not a trade-off that we like, but it was just done for considerations of lowering the cost of training. Otherwise, training would take too long. So we experimented with using other functionals as well. The choice of B3LYP here is largely random. You could probably switch to any other DFT functional here and probably get the same answer. The answer would not change so much. As I said, the role of B3LYP here is just to get the functional in an approximately okay shape, and then from that point on, we let the self-consistent training take over. So in a world of infinite computes, we wouldn't be using B3LYP at all.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Is there any other question before we close? Okay, Dr. Deniz, thank you for your participation.
It was a pleasure. Thank you for the kind invitation.
And you for your valuable contributions. And we hope to keep in touch with you for future collaboration, hopefully. Thank you.
Sounds good. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you.